Hi, I'm Suzanne Jolly from Jolly Good Multimedia. I'm the director and producer of the film A Wilder Way, which was selected for showing at the 2024 TMFF Motorcycle Film Festival.
Welcome to the Real Riders Podcast. My name's Simon Josie, and if this is your first time here, welcome and thanks for listening. As you heard at the beginning of this episode, my guest today is Suzanne Jolly, director of the film A Wilder Way, an adventure motorcycling film shot in British Columbia, Canada. Shortly you'll hear our conversation and no doubt delight in listening to me being schooled about my poor grizzly bear knowledge. But first I want to mention a couple of things. I'm currently working through a backlog of recorded interviews, and my conversation with Suzanne was actually recorded in mid-November at the beginning of the Northern Hemisphere winter. Secondly, if you're interested in another podcast interview with Suzanne, she featured on the Adventure Rider Radio podcast, with her episode being released on the 15th of November this year. And finally, I have included in the show notes links to Jolly Good Multimedia's YouTube channel, where you can watch the trailer for A Wilder Way and also both seasons of Suzanne's documentary series, Where the Wind Meets the Tide. As always, if you have the time and inclination, please consider rating or liking the Real Riders podcast in your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. This will help other listeners find the podcast. And from a social media perspective, the podcast is active on both Instagram and Blue Sky these days. Recently, I posted a little video on Instagram marking the first anniversary of the podcast, which was on the 11th of December. Righto, let's get to my talk with Suzanne. Welcome to the podcast, Suzanne, and thanks for coming on to talk about your motorcycling and filmmaking. How are you today?
I'm really great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Cool. Look, first question. I know you're based in British Columbia, Canada. Has the winter started to bite yet? And if it hasn't, or if it has, do you actually ride all year round during the winter, or have you already put your bike away to hibernate until spring?
Well, this morning was actually the first big frost that we've seen, but it's sunny today and yesterday, so I ride until I find that the season really dominates with cold, wet, and snow. We don't get a ton of snow, but sometimes we will get a few weeks of it. But I actually keep the bike insured throughout the year so that I don't have to have a sunny day with no ice on the road and not be able to ride. Yeah, so I love riding all year round, and I got a heated vest this past year, and I have heated grips, and now I have electric heated gloves too. So now I'm actually cozy, and I don't have to be like a big snowman with 5 layers on. So that makes a big improvement as well.
Yeah, for sure. What about the roads near you? I know that you're probably going off-road, but to get to those off-road tracks, are you having to drive across salted roads, or is there no salting?
Oh, yeah, there's definitely salting and graveling on our roads up here on North Island. But yeah, I don't really worry about it. I mean, the bike is made to be dirty and get beat up, and that's what I do with it and on the gravel. So I'm not very concerned about that. Probably no one will want to buy my T7 when I'm done with it.
Right. Okay. So you've got that's a Yamaha T7, yeah?
Yeah, it's a beautiful Yamaha T7. And actually, I got one of the first into North America. I lucked out that I put in a down payment in advance, and we were all chomping at the bit to get T7s into North America. And then COVID hit, and only one shipment made it to Canada, and I got one of those bikes. So I've been bragging about my T7 for quite a few years now.
I'm sure. Yeah. Well, okay. Well, I've ticked one box, which is always important, just to ask you what you ride. So that's good. So we can put that away now, and we can talk about your film to start with, A Wilder Way. So, as mentioned earlier, it was selected for showing at the 2024 TMFF Motorcycle Film Festival. Can you tell me how the idea for the film first arose?
Sure. A Wilder Way was an idea about a boat-assisted riding trip years ago that I had started pitching to folks in the motorcycle industry as an idea that I wanted to do. And I wasn't a filmmaker at the time, so filmmaking wasn't a priority. It was more about the trip. And then many years later, I happened to be doing filmmaking. I got into filmmaking, and I was in my second series of my first documentary called Where the Wind Meets the Tide, which features people who work on the water. And folks can watch that on YouTube if they want. But basically, I was meeting with this one owner, Guy Adams from Marine Link Tours, and he had a huge freight delivery vessel that delivers freight all into like logging camps and rural communities along the coast. And at the end of the interview, I had been sitting there listening to him, thinking about his boat, and eyeing up this map on the wall beside him. And I just said to him, it's funny. I wonder if one day I could bring my bike on board the Aurora Explorer. It's a 135-foot vessel, and it's a landing craft and has a ramp. So I was like, I wonder if I could put my bike on board and get dropped off in a few spots. And he laughed, and he's like, well, I won't put you on the Aurora, but I have a smaller boat. When do you want to go? And how many friends do you want to take? Like, bring about a dozen, he said. And as soon as that opened up as an opportunity, I was so excited and was like, oh, but I don't like to ride with a lot of people. Can I just go solo? And then I thought about how remote of an area I was thinking about putting in on, and he suggested some areas. So I started looking at satellite imagery, and that's how it kind of came to be that I got to do the trip. But then I love filmmaking, and I realized I'd really love to showcase an interesting adventure ride, one that I'd been dreaming of for so many years. And so I decided, all right, let's see if I can get some funding to help piece together a film crew to join me on part of the trip at least.
And when you talk about the coast, which coast actually is that? Is that of the Vancouver Island coast, or is it on the mainland?
Yeah, so we actually loaded onto the vessel just north of Campbell River on northern Vancouver Island. And then we transited through these remote, tiny islands, the Discovery and the North Island area, and went over to the mainland in such a remote area. There's a logging camp in that area, like they're actively logging. And just north of there, there's the Night Inlet Lodge, which is well known for grizzly bear viewing. And we might have been able to get up into that area. The roads we discovered on satellite imagery went up into that region, but we wouldn't have actually been able to ride up to the lodge. But that's all that's in that region. Other than that, it's just, bears and forest and fish in the rivers, But there was enough of a network of logging roads still activated that we could ride for a long time up there.
And those logging roads, can anyone use them? Do you need to get permission to use them, or are they just... Is it free for anyone to use if you've got the means to traverse them?
Yeah, anyone can really show up into some of these areas. The logging companies tend to gate areas that are really accessible to the general public via car because they have problems with people stealing and vandalizing their equipment. But typically for these really remote areas, they don't bother gating them, and you can travel through there. It's funny that you asked me this. It's something that I haven't mentioned to anyone else, is actually we were visiting an area that actually overlaps with 3 different First Nations territories. And so I have a history of working with some of those First Nations. So I reached out and connected with the chiefs from all 3 nations to garner permission to ride in their area, and also to find out about certain parts of those areas have some sacred terrain and some really amazingly important cultural artifacts. And so I just garnered some of that information from them to make sure that we were going to be respectful in their area. And they were really willing to have me film and ride up in there.
So when did it start becoming a real thing? Like when did you actually shoot the footage, and sort of when did the pre-production planning really start in earnest?
So we really started recruiting, I guess it was about a year in advance. So we ended up filming in September of 2023, but we were originally planning to be filming in July or August. But the BC wildfire season was intense that summer, and we had a lot of lightning strikes up in the region where we were planning on riding. And since we were a day boat ride to get rescued if there was a wildfire, I didn't want to risk the crew. So we had to push back our dates into late September. And I started recruiting riders, I think about a year prior, to join me on the ride, because I wanted to see who would be game and see who would be the adventurous folks who would join me. And then also it was logistics around dealing with the logging company and talking to them and making sure that we weren't going to be interrupting their logging activity in that region out of respect for the fact that they built those roads and such, that kind of took us through the winter. But then the real push for sponsorships and help to be able to fund like the editing work and the 2 camera guys who joined, that was really in the winter of 2023 and then into early 2024. Or I might be mixing up my years there. It was 1 year this past September that I actually filmed. So I guess it was 2022 when I actually started. Time is a bit of a flux for me when I'm like pushing for a film.
And I know, having seen the film, that you went with 3 riders. So you went with 2 cameramen, is that right? Mm-hmm. 2 cameramen and 3 other riders. And had you ridden with those riders ever before? No.
So it was really fun. Since I had been kind of tracking who was getting Tenerés since I had one of the first into North America, I was kind of keeping an eye on when did I see a woman with a Teneré in my region. And so I kind of had a sense of who in BC and Alberta had a Teneré like me. And so I thought to myself, well, it would be easiest logistically to have us all on the same bikes. We have the same fuel range. We have similar types of parts and understanding of the bikes. And also I thought, 4 women on Tenerés would be pretty badass. Hope that's okay to say. And I thought, oh yeah, and that'll help me pitch to Yamaha to get a little bit of funding to help pay for all the work. And so I went out of my way to connect with these women via social media at first to just be like, hey, I'm planning a ride and I wanted to get your perspective. I didn't tell them that I wanted to invite them because I had never spoken to them and I was worried that they might be not people that I would want to spend time with because you can meet other riders you don't like. It's shocking. And so we basically connected via phone and I told them about the trip that I was planning, and then slowly as we chatted more about what they do and their perspectives on riding and what they've done in the past, I got a sense of who they were and whether or not they had this skill set. And I had scoped them out on social media to see what types of rides they were doing and whatnot in order to come. And then at the end of the call, I'd be like, and so do you want to come? And the response was pretty excited. Yeah. I had a few women who weren't able to come because of timing and such, but we ended up with 4 of us on Tenerés. So that was super, super awesome.
And was the idea always to just be 4 riders, or had you originally thought maybe a few more as well?
No, more riders is more trouble, to be honest. And in fact, I found 4 is a lot. For someone who typically, like myself, solo rides, bringing 4 feisty, independent, strong-willed women together is a challenge, right? We're all pretty fierce about the way we do things. And so 4 was enough. But also it was funny because I'd only seen the boat that we were using and it was out of the water when I saw it. And then when I saw it the morning of filming, when we rolled up, all 4 of us, I was like, how are we going to cram our bikes into that? It was not as big as I expected. And so I'm really glad that I didn't invite any more. We would have had to do 2 trips and that would have taken a whole day to manage. So
yeah. Did the cameramen have bikes as well, or were they on foot?
We had 3 camera operators in total that were worked on the film. One of them shot a bunch of B-roll with us the day before we left so that we could get those detailed tire shots and things like that. Because you need a lot more footage than people expect to be able to make a really great film. And then we had 2 camera operators come with us. One was actually behind the scenes photographer who actually was my husband. And the other one was our main camera operator. And what they did was they jumped on the second vessel. So we had a secondary vessel from Marine Link Tours that was just a pleasure craft. And they could get shots from the pleasure craft while we were on the boat. And there's some amazing shots they got. I'm so impressed with Stan, our DP. And then for the first half day, when we were on the mainland or on the actual spot where we were riding, we had gotten an ATV dropped off by that big Aurora Explorer boat that I talked about earlier. It just swung through and dropped off some extra fuel and water and an ATV. And so the 2 camera operators traveled an ATV and followed us around only for a few hours, to be honest. And then they had to head back to the vessel. And the rest of the entire film was filmed by me with Insta360, GoPro, and my iPhone. And we chose those because of their waterproofness, for a hint for everyone to know what type of adventure we had.
Yeah. That's interesting, because I remember watching the film in the theatre in Toronto, and then when you came up on stage and you were talking a little bit about it, and that was the first time I think you mentioned the crew, and you actually went with the crew, which is kind of unusual, because a lot of, should we say, adventure trips, people don't take the crew with them. They just shoot a whole lot and hope something good happens, and they can find a film out of it. Which is another question I have. How much did you script or pre-plan the film, or did you just sort of hope, well, we'll just shoot a lot and see what happens?
Well, that's the thing is, like, for good documentary filmmaking, you really do come together with a storyline and a pitch and an idea of what will happen. And it was really hard to kind of develop that for me, because I'm so used to flying by the seat of my pants as an adventure rider. And I knew that it would be tricky for me to get some of the most beautiful shots if I was shooting them, because I wanted shots of all four of us riding together. And the storyline, in fact, was originally going to be more about all four of us than it ended up being. And the storyline included things like grizzly bears and things like that, which we didn't get a chance to see, which would have been very likely to see in that region. But because of the different epic adventure we had than we had planned, our story changed drastically. We didn't have enough time to get lots more audio with the other riders, so we couldn't weave their stories in more, or their perspectives in more, which was disappointing for me. I didn't really want to be the main character of the film, to be honest. But then I was in a documentary film program at the same time. I actually got accepted into that program while I was on the boat back from this trip. And through some mentoring with that film community, with the Whistler Film Festival, they were amazing about helping me try to figure out the storyline now that I had a very different story and not as many voices as I had wanted. So yeah, it was very, very different than what I had originally planned. But I think good filmmaking really does come in with a plan. Like, I had a huge shot list for my camera operators in advance to make sure that we got certain types of shots and things like that. And we did follow a lot of that with them. But like, we only had them on the trip really with us for a few hours. And then the rest of the time was just me. But as soon as they were gone, the whole story fell apart. So I feel like it was good luck to have them on board. I really did hesitate to have them, especially like if you meet Stan Novotny, our amazing main camera operator. He and DP, he is this huge guy. He's a huge guy, and he looks like he's a bouncer basically when he's standing beside me. And I was like, I don't want to have protectors with us when we're out in the wilderness. That's not how we normally roll. But I did want to value the quality of filmmaking. So it was a kind of a nice balance, and something I would do again to be able to really have better camera shots. And some of the footage that he captured, even at my house, for example, in the driveway when we were having the conversations during packing, I didn't know that those had happened until I was in editing mode. So having an extra set of eyes with a camera really did benefit the storyline a lot.
Mm. Now, I kind of want to dive in a little bit to some of the, I'm not sure plot lines is the right term, but I also don't want to spoil for people who might get to see the film. But you obviously had some personal challenges to overcome before you were able to make that movie. And I think maybe it would be worth discussing those a little bit, because I'm interested in whether you ended up making the film that you thought you were going to make, or whether the film sort of changed a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about my head injury. It's fine, Simon. Thank you for being gentle about it. It's part of our like log lines and stuff, because it's a factor in some of the story. It's funny because a lot of the festival advertising didn't actually include that part of the storyline. And I do really want people to come and watch the adventure film that it is, because a lot of people won't go watch a film that's a disability story, that are like, there's just not as much interest. And so we made an adventure story, but there's a disability story woven in. And that's mine. Yay. So basically, yeah, my storyline around my head injury was originally part of just a little bit of the intro to basically acknowledge that I had planned the original trip. I had started planning that trip and dreaming of that trip, and then I got my head injury. And so I lost my ability to ride and walk. I mean, I could walk a little bit and then I'd have to rest for hours, So basically, I had planned on having that as part of the story, but I didn't actually feel comfortable as much about talking openly about an invisible disability. But I've had progressing complications related to the impacts of my head injury that made me kind of have to acknowledge that, yeah, it is a disability that I deal with now. And so basically we decided to weave it in, and I actually had not arguments, but strong conversations with my editor, who would want to leave out some of my voiceover, where I would acknowledge some of the extra challenge I was dealing with in some scenarios, because people can't see an invisible disability. People meet me all the time and I'm out riding and they think I'm such a great badass. And yet they don't realize that that's the one day I'm functioning well and other days I don't get to be that person, and that it really fluctuates. And that, yeah, I can ride that technical line, and yeah, I can push myself, but maybe shouldn't be doing that at times, because, one small fall for me has major consequences. I've tried to make people understand that who've ridden with me by saying, if you had a 90% chance of breaking your femur, if you just fell over, would you still ride the same? It's different. And so I still ride some gnarly stuff. I still mitigate those risks as best I can, but I make decisions to try to set aside my ego when I'm riding now because of the head injury and the fact that I want to live to ride another day. I don't want to end up in a care home, right? Because of, having a small fall over. And my first season back riding, I did have a small over, very small. Everyone would just be like, oh, she didn't even get a bruise. But I ended up with 3 months of rehab because I was messed up from it. And so I'm very mindful of that, but also I have bounding enthusiasm for riding. So I kind of get carried away sometimes too with that. So, and I still have a wild streak. So it's kind of a fun balance to find. But yeah, we did weave it in a lot more. It was also influenced by that film program that I was in, because I was pitching the idea of taking this as one episode of a series, and that's still a dream of mine. And when I was pitching to some of the senior level execs of big TV, Paramount Pictures and things like that. And they all kept saying, I want to hear more about that story. It sounds great that you're going to go on a fun girls trip, but I want to hear a little bit more about that recovery story that you have. And I realized that, yeah, it is a unique story. And I really wanted people to feel less alone who were going through, even mild concussions and their repercussions, because they can be devastating for folks. And so I decided, okay, well, I guess this is the time to start talking openly about that.
That's really interesting to me, because that's kind of what I remember. I mean, this is one of the disadvantages I have. I saw the film in early October in Toronto, and I haven't seen it since. I'm sort of relying a little bit on my memory of but I kind of still have some memories of certain feelings about it. And I remember sort of sitting up and going, oh, this isn't quite the film that I thought the trailer had indicated. This is going in a different direction. But then I also got the feeling that it could have been pushed a little bit more about, it could have actually been a recovery story film. That could have actually been how the film was pushed, promoted, possibly even edited more in that direction. So it's interesting to me that you say that there was that tension and sort of this awareness that was growing in yourself as you were talking to people about it, oh, maybe I should push a bit more. So obviously you got to a point where you're quite comfortable with the way it turned out and that you were able to put a lot more of that sort of backstory in. Now, I do want to, just for everyone listening, just point out something. The head injury did not result from a motorcycle crash, did it?
Yeah, no, I can tell that. Yeah, everyone assumes, even people who were my close friends at the time, when I got my head injury, they just assumed I'd had a crash on a motorbike. And that's the best, I think, part of my story is I had stupid little hits to the head that messed me up. I was on a sailboat and someone hadn't tied down the sail properly, and we were just minutes from the dock, and I just about to crack a beer, and we were just like motoring along, and the sail caught some wind, and a metal piece in the sail whacked me in the head. And that was one small concussion. And I was messed up for a few days. I think I was off work after I went to work the next day, and then they sent me home because it seemed like I was drunk, because I was like so goofy. I was like, oh, having a head injury is a fun time. I laughed and stuff about it. And then about 3 weeks later, I was walking under a bridge wearing a ball cap, and I was walking my new puppy, Moto, and I went to go and duck under the bridge, and I didn't have good depth perception, I think, because of the first head injury or the first concussion. And I rammed my front of my head into that bridge. And then when I pulled back suddenly, because I was like, oh, I just hit my head, I rammed the side of my head into the side of the bridge. And I think I might have ding-donged like a bell a couple times. But even then, I could walk. I didn't get knocked out. I walked home with my husband. I knew I was messed up from it. I was not good. My doctor had read me the riot act about concussions because I had actually been riding in like an enduro training course like a week after my first one on that sailboat. So my doctor was pretty upset, and he was just like, you need to really take these seriously. If you get a second, it could be very, very serious. And lo and behold, I got a stupid way to get a second concussion. But yeah, neither of them motorbike related, and literally fell apart. Like as a human, I was a totally, completely devastated, isolated human. And even folks who know me from those times, they didn't really get to see me. I just literally had to opt out of everything for months, and like 8 months, I think it was. And then even when I came back, people still see me and think that I'm the same because I look like it, and I do have that energy. I'm back to a bit of the positive, energetic person that I used to be, but that ebbs and flows a lot drastically and changes a lot. So yeah, and that's the hard part, is to try to explain that to people, and that, what you see is not always what I get,
Yeah. You've obviously been making films for a while now, but were there any specific things that arose during the production of this particular film that surprised you, that hadn't occurred before in your filmmaking history?
Yeah, so I've actually only been making films for about 3 or 4 years now, to be honest. And this is my only, other than my documentary series, which has 2 seasons, 14 episodes, this is my first foray into filmmaking on the motorcycle side of things. But for the production side of things, I mean, my storyline changed drastically. So then I didn't know what to do with all this footage. And I didn't have the voices of the other riders and couldn't get them on camera easily again because they are dispersed all over BC and Alberta. And then, I mean, in terms of production, I guess one of the main struggles was the storm that we faced, making it really difficult for me to be an adventure rider and be a camera operator all at once. And I look back and I'm a bit disappointed in myself that I wasn't more motivated to actually get more footage. I was honestly at points just so exhausted and a bit scared about our ability to get home. And for me, I felt a deeper sense of responsibility for the other riders because they would never have been there except for me and my crazy dream. And so I was a bit upset in post about that sort of thing. And then I didn't really want a film that had voiceover. I'm not a huge fan of voiceovers. They sometimes come across as super cheesy to me. And yet that was the only way I could find to link the film footage into a good film and a good story if I put in some voiceover. So hopefully it doesn't come across as too cheesy, Simon.
I don't remember it being cheesy. I mean, I've really actually come round to the idea of voiceover because I think there's some of my favorite sort of filmmakers do some really good voiceover.
Yeah, if it's done really well.
Yeah, it's tone. Sometimes it's even the sound of their voice is great. But I would certainly agree when it comes to fictional narrative type of films, it's, and I've talked about this a little bit in the podcast before, it's kind of a lazy mechanism to move story along, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But I think when it comes to documentary,
makes sense.
Sometimes you need it because otherwise you're expecting the audience maybe to work a little bit too hard to follow along.
Well, and we never could have told the disability story without voiceover to really explain some of those things that were happening at the time. And I will say I was really lucky with my editor, Dan Peruzzo was our editor, and he really helped coach me through how would we weave that in a way that worked well and was more subtle. And then I had an audio guy as well help me with the voiceover. And I scripted all the voiceover myself, which was tricky for me because it's hard because I'm a verbose storyteller, as you might have already picked up. And so I had to really edit down to the nitty gritty and what we really needed. And Dan and I had grand debates about some of those things because he really came on board for the action adventure. And that's why I brought him on as an editor. He's a very fast-paced editor and a professional one that makes fast energy driven films. And so it's kind of funny because, some of the voiceover slows things down a little. It's not all testosterone and aggro-ness.
It's interesting that you talk so much about the editor, Dan, and his role in the making of the film, because this is something that I've also talked about with previous guests. To what extent does the editor have a constructive or creative role in the making of a film? What's been your experience, or what's your opinion on that topic?
Well, I edited my first documentary series all myself, and I see how much control editing has on the story and the incredible way in which we can adapt a story with editing. And so I really think it benefits to have more people, more voices and perspectives when you're doing the editing. And I did run a few rough cuts by other folks too, even one of the writers, just to get outsider perspectives. And I think it's just the way in which I am as a human and a filmmaker is I really believe in collaborative work. And that's why I just really make sure I surround myself with people who I really find understand the concept of the film and understand the values I have. And I can trust to have respectful dialogue with, to debate about, what stays and what ends up on the edited floor. But yeah, I really think that people are improved by collaboration and teamwork. So yeah, I'm really lucky to have Dan and then Stan as our main DP. Both of them have been involved with other projects with me as well. So.
Yeah. Through your experience of editing the documentary series about the lives of people who work on the water, do you feel that editing experience has been invaluable in terms of your development as a director and sort of a filmmaker in general?
Oh, definitely. First off, it garnered me so much more respect for an amazing film. Editing is far harder than I ever imagined. And detail orientation is not my strong suit either. So I really am impressed with Dan and his editing and detailed way of working. But I do think it makes me stronger because even my friend Kathy, one of the writers, has ridden with me since, and we went into the northern section of the backcountry discovery route in Washington together, and she would laugh because I'd be like, oh, no, stop here. I'm going to get a video or I'm going to get a photo. And she would see that I had this way of seeing that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't been editing so much in the past. I know that when a shot is certainly taken and where I'll probably place it later in the sequence. And I have that happen all the time. It's actually a problem now because I can't just take an Instagram photo, I have ideas for larger things. So I have a bunch of footage from riding that I haven't even had the time to edit that I really would love to get out on our socials. But that'll be in time when I have the energy after I, launch the film a little bit more. And because we've got the other showing coming up and everything. So, or a couple showings coming up.
Do you think it's made you as you travel now, a more efficient film operator or camera operator in the sense that rather than just capturing a lot of footage and hoping for the best, you now have a much more precise idea about what you need, and so you're looking and when those shots are coming up?
Definitely. I will say, Simon, one of the challenges of editing is having way too much footage to sort through and the patience to go through hours and hours of footage. I even had problems on a Wilder Way. We had so much footage from different cameras, from my Insta360 and my iPhone, and then also footage from Stan and behind the scenes footage that sometimes actually worked out to use and things like that, that it was a tremendous amount of footage to sort through. So yeah, I definitely becomes like a priority. I grab priority shots, which I don't know is always great because sometimes you do need to grab some of those boring, like longer clips that just are good for filler. But I definitely try to, especially when I'm riding, I really am not prioritizing camera operating when I'm riding. I literally don't want to be a social media influencer. I'm not trying to chase after sponsorship dollars. I literally just love to ride and wanted a movie about women riding so that people could see women in the backcountry being capable and camping in the backcountry and being in the wilderness on their bikes as a normal thing, as opposed to as like mythical unicorns that they'd like to date, type of thing. So there's some sass for you, everyone. Oh, you're not even going to engage with that one, Simon. You're not going to go there, hey? Well, you're just going to let that sleeping dog lie.
Actually, it's funny. There's something in the water in BC because there seems to be. I'm sort of aware of a number of women riders, either through podcasts or films, that all centered sort of around the west coast of Canada. I mean, like I say, is there something in the water there, or is it just those are the ones making the most noise, and that's why I'm aware of them? I mean,
that's interesting. So you just think that there's a lot more female adventure riders out our way?
Maybe it's just the geography, possibly.
Yeah, I think people are really interested in British Columbia, like West Coast stories. Even like some of the motorcycle companies based in Europe, for example, European customers, I know they love to see like women in the wilderness with bears, for example. That was brought up by one sponsor and stuff like that. I think there is a community of female riders now, which is amazing because there didn't used to be. I used to know like the 4 other women who rode on dirt in BC when I first learned to ride for that first decade. And now there's this amazing community, and there's a She ADV community that's mainly based in the US, but there's a bunch of female riders who join on the calls and go down to the US for their rides. And that community has really been developing more and more female adventure riders, which is exciting. It's a really powerful organization, and I'm really, really, really impressed with what they're doing. But yeah, I think also the west coast of BC and even the States, there's a lot more outdoorsiness, technically, like in our culture. And so like I was a backcountry skier and a backcountry hiker and a rock climber. And so me getting on a motorbike and camping in the wilderness was not a big deal. Like it was, yeah, I needed to learn how to ride a bike, but otherwise I had all those other backcountry skills already. So I think that might be some of why we see some more overlap. And also, I do think that there's a nice network developing amongst women riders that want to lift each other up and be supportive. And some of the motorcycle companies are really hearing that, women adventure riders are a real market that they can start to target more and more. So, yeah.
One of the big things I hear actually that women riders complain about is they can't get the gear. They can't get the gear that's made for women riders. Is that something, are you seeing that being addressed in the market yet?
It's getting better. It's certainly better than when I used to ride before my head injury. It was practically impossible to get any female-specific gear. But yeah, there's still such a huge amount. I'll give you a really practical example. If you watch the film, lots of people will actually comment afterwards about like my helmet, that it's not like a very high-end helmet that I was wearing. And I literally have been wanting to get a high-end, really lovely carbon fiber helmet. And yet my size head is an extra small. So I didn't want to ask a local shop to order in an extra small helmet that might not fit properly, because then they would be stuck with an extra small they couldn't sell. And I would feel kind of pressured to buy it no matter what, because I don't want to stick them with my little helmet that they literally will be like trying to find someone who has an extra small head. It's very hard. And the same goes with gloves. I have had a very tough time getting gloves that fit my hands. My hands are tiny, and it's really problematic because gloves are such an important part in terms of functioning with your brake and your throttle and your clutch as a safety mechanism. In fact, I popped a wheelie the other day by accident, and I was wearing these bigger, thicker winter gloves, which I think actually would have happened for anyone with big, thicker winter gloves. But these ones just have like just a little bit too much length on the thumb. And, for grip, the thumb is so important. And I lost my right hand off the throttle at the end of that wheelie. And to be honest, I don't pop wheelies. I've dreamed of doing them more often, and it is definitely in my scope. But I have been scared to because I don't want a head injury again. But I did it crossing a ditch by accident. So yay. And yet the gloves themselves could have meant I crashed because I couldn't grip properly. And so it is getting better. It's nice. But right now I have 2 different brands I can choose from for really good waterproof adventure riding gear. 2 brands. That's it. And honestly, when you go out riding with other women, we look like we're in a bloody uniform because we're all in the same kit. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
But it is better that we don't have all pink gear, which is what I used to experience. There is waterproof adventure gear for women now, but there's a long way to go. But I understand why the motorcycle companies aren't chasing, because we don't have a huge amount of people buying like men are. But we're growing, thankfully. It is an untapped market that's growing.
Yeah, that's one thing. I don't have any statistics. I'd love to see some, because you hear a lot of people saying, motorcycling is just becoming an old man's sport or activity. And young people apparently are not taking up motorcycling, certainly not in the rates that they used to do. Mm-hmm. But then actually young people aren't driving at the same rates that they used to do either. Mm-hmm. And so I do see quite a lot of noise about the fact that a lot of women, a lot of older women actually are like, hey, I want to give this a go. So
that's cool. It's really cool.
It would be interesting to see what the statistics are around the growth of that particular market segment. And I just hope the motorcycle accessories companies are taking notice of it and tracking it carefully if it really is growing. So maybe just one last thing about the film itself. Currently, is there any way for the general public to see the film?
They can see the trailer. It's on our YouTube channel, but they can't see the film yet. And I know a lot of folks want me to just release it on YouTube, but it's not the same. I don't want to be insulting to folks on YouTube because there's some great YouTube channels and such, but it's a really high investment film. It's meant as an independent film. It's not meant as a vlog or a YouTube channel piece. And so we're taking it first to film festivals, and we're waiting to hear a little bit more about options on that front from a few festivals. But we are in the Toronto Motorcycle Film Festival at the Victoria tour stop, which we're creating, which I'm really excited to bring the festival to Vancouver Island for the first time. And then we have a showing in Campbell River with the Campbell River Festival of Film. And then we are looking at more of a distribution through TV. And we are pitching to TV as a series. So folks will have to wait, I guess, to see A Wilder Way, but they can check out the trailer for now to get a snippet. And I am actually really open to talking as a filmmaker. Like, it's fun for me to bring my film to other places. Like, we premiered at the Touratech Rally in Washington last June. So if someone has an interest in having A Wilder Way come to their festival or their event, then I'd really encourage them to reach out to me. It's kind of a fun way for me to garner more opportunity for folks to see it, but also to support events. Like we did this with the Get Lost, Find Yourself Foundation, which is up in Port McNeill area on northern Vancouver Island. It's a men's mental health rally, motorcycle rally. And so we brought the film up there for a one-night showing with that crew, and that was amazing. And so, yeah, I'd really encourage if any of your listeners are interested in seeing it and bringing it to some event. I would love to be able to fly to wherever that is too, but I likely can't do that as an independent filmmaker. We don't make a lot, but I'll try. But at least I could share it with you. Yeah.
Okay, so you said that you've only been making films about 3 years. How did you get into it?
I've always been a writer, and I worked in marketing and communications for many, many years. So I've been a storyteller. And basically there's a TELUS-funded program for new filmmakers called TELUS Story Hive that offers grants for people to tell local stories and create local content. And I was lucky enough to pitch to them. And I had been thinking about getting into filmmaking. So during the pandemic, since we were going to be locked in our homes anyways, I signed up for an online course with the BC Institute of Tech just to learn about film producing and such. And honestly, didn't even pass the course. I got really bored in it. But I took that course and then went, oh, yeah, I could probably do this. And then I saw the TELUS Story Hive program. And a friend of mine who's a filmmaker in Kamloops had gotten funding in the past for a really awesome mountain bike film that featured women too, actually. And so I reached out to her and she kind of mentored me through the application process. So thanks to Vesta for that help. And basically started with that program, which allowed me to get the 2 seasons of Where the Wind Meets the Tide onto TELUS Optic TV, which is available in BC and Alberta and on YouTube.
There are obviously a lot of roles in making films. Which part of filmmaking is the part that gets you really excited? Which sort of the traditional roles that we think of sort of directing, maybe producing is not quite so exciting, but editing or, starring in it, because that's, you are the star of
I know.
of your
so
own
uncomfortable
movie.
with that. Yeah. Thanks for rubbing that in. I really appreciate that. I actually love directing. I noticed so much of the ways in which I got to call the shots on this film that influenced how we would be seen as writers and we would be seen as women or not. Like, I wanted us to be seen as writers first and not women first. And I wanted also control over how my disability story unfolded. But even the way in which we shoot that or where we choose to shoot that, as the director, I really have that sense of vision, and the storytelling piece as like the character-driven stories is something that I've always focused on. And so I've been quite actually surprised, to be honest, about like, oh, I'm actually better than this than I thought I would be. Like, basically, when I talk to other filmmakers and what they're struggling with, I find, oh, I know how to solve that storyline issue. Like, I just see it, and I just hear it. And I think that comes from a background in writing stories. And like, I did magazine writing and marketing and communications writing for many years. So yeah, that's what I hope to be in the future. I really do hope to bring on a producer in the future who has more experience in TV and film to help me navigate some of the struggles with the industry, and also just to lighten my load a bit, because it's really hard to have a vision when you're exhausted because you're doing everything else, which is what I did on A Wilder Way. And I'm also, of course, thrilled with the idea of getting to ride as work. Like when you're riding for film, it's quite different. There's a lot of retaking the shot to get the focus right and stuff like that when you're, cruising through a puddle or whatever it is. But I definitely love the idea of like having a series where I go out and get to ride with other people and have them tell their stories, not me being the main character the whole time, but thankfully, because I can't stand the attention. But then, allowing people to tell their stories and making sure, I think you feel the same way about your podcast guests, making sure that we make them look good and showcase their real character and their real ability to shine. I really think that that's an ethical responsibility and goes against some of the ways in which TV really pushes reality TV and things like that for the drama,
Yeah. Don't get me started on reality TV.
I know someone talked to me about wanting me to do the series as a reality TV, and I was like, no, just no, I'm not there to like exploit people's trauma and make them cry on film. That's not what I do as a human being. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, do you draw a big distinction between directing and writing? Because I actually think when it comes to writing, that's a very important part of filmmaking. And I think if the director and the writer aren't on the same page, I think that's very problematic. I think the sort of the writer, the director, the editor all have to be on the same page for sure.
I haven't had the privilege of having a writer yet, other than me being the writer. So in terms of writing, so I am hoping that in the future I could have a writer who co-writes with me.
Yeah.
But I would still want to be in the writing fray. There's no way. Words mean so much to me.
Yeah, because that was kind of what I was interested in. I was wondering if you saw yourself a big difference between writing and directing, and you were still choosing to take the directing role rather than being the writer, because I guess traditionally the director kind of has the final say of how things are going to be. There'll be a script, but there'll be some interpretation from a director. Director will have that final say, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But then maybe in a lot of documentary making, you almost can't separate the role of the writer and the director. In the future, you'll still want to be very close to the writing process.
Yeah, definitely. Especially because it's hard to find a writer who would really understand motorcycle culture, for example, and the language and the lingo of it, So I would need to be in the fray on that.
See, okay, so let me challenge you a little bit on that.
Sure.
Because one of the things that be really interested to see is to take someone who's a complete non-motorcycle person and say, here's the subject, some sort of motorcycle film, go and make it, and see as a non-motorcycle writer how they made that film. That to me, that sounds like an interesting lab experiment.
It would be kind of interesting. I will tell you that something that I didn't mention about A Wilder Way is we purposefully developed it not just for motorcyclists. Like, that's why we explain what we're doing at some mechanical issue there. It's so that folks who are non-motorcyclists kind of can understand. I think of it as like an opportunity for adventure riders to be able to show break out the popcorn with their family and kids. And then that gets them to understand what their loved one is doing when they're taking off on their bike all the time into the wilderness, to have that opportunity. But I would be really interested. I'd be totally fine with someone coming on board as a writer who wasn't a motorcyclist. I'm thinking I've been thinking about the producer. They have to be a motorcyclist. But the writer could be a non-motorcyclist because I bring that knowledge. And so that's where I think of that collaboration of I can bring in the lingo and the culture piece. And they can also bring the writing experience for TV and film, which I don't have. I'm just a writer at heart, and, in different ways. So I think it'd be an interesting collaboration for sure.
Yeah, yeah. What other projects have you worked on, or what type of project actually appeals to you?
It's always character-driven stories. And I really do like to have the opportunity to showcase people's stories who might surprise or challenge stereotypes. All throughout Where the Wind Meets the Tide, I was consistently even challenging my own stereotypes. For example, we filmed with fish techs who were Indigenous, who are working to maintain the coho salmon, because there's a lot of negative stereotypes on the coast about Indigenous folks just pillaging the seas all the time. And so I really do like bringing forth stories that feature characters that are, hardworking and dedicated to what they do. And then I obviously have a real passion as a feminist to bring forth more female stories. But I also think, now that I say that out loud, I actually have started to think about how we need to have more male stories, but that perhaps are just not so cliched male stories. And that's because I do really love men, even though I'm a feminist. But I just definitely see that TV and film is kind of going to an extreme level of content being consistently ignoring men or making males roles into the stupid, dumb, evil guy or the macho, dumb guy and stuff like that. And I'd really love to have, media that actually lifts people up more often and that type of thing. But yeah, it's been funny. Lots of people have been asking me about other stories or what other documentaries I might work on. And I'm not sure yet. It's something that folks don't really understand is how much energy that creative process takes to create a film and to plan a film and to plan an adventure ride that's way more complicated too. And then you've got the film and then you have to go out and market the film and you have to go out and get film festivals to show it and all of that. So it's a lot of energy. And I just really lately have found I don't have a lot of energy for another creative project right now. And that's a bit upsetting for me because, there's a momentum that comes off of showing the film. But sometimes I've found that when you try to push for things like that, that ends up being like a blockade of series of things that get in your way. And then that's because you've been waiting. Later down the pipe, you'll end up having the solution to some problem that will be like, oh, that's what I need to do. And that's what I learned from the first, second seasons of Where the Wind Meets the Tide, as I kept on trying to get a storyline to finish with character or something, and then another event would unfold, and I'd be like, oh, like, for example, one of the fish vents blew out, and that was the way that I finally could end an episode about these fish techs. And I literally was so frustrated for about a month editing this episode, not able to find a good finish. And then suddenly this fish fence blew out for the first time ever. And I was able to get footage the day before this last episode was due, and it solved the story. So yeah, I'm kind of like waiting and seeing what happens and unfolds with life, because I think, I'm regaining some of the energy for creative projects, but also the universe shall provide, I guess, if I'm going to go cheesy hippie with that.
Do you hold to the belief that basically everyone has a story to tell? It's just a matter of extracting it from them?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think that if we all had that sense of that everyone has stories within them that are valuable and that are meaningful, then we'd have a lot more respect for other people, because it's amazing when you start to ask little bits of questions to kind of like go, what did you mean by that? It's amazing what stories people really have about what they've done or what they've accomplished, but also what they've lived through. And it's a really beautiful thing in terms of humanity to be able to share those.
People in the motorcycling world talk often about doing long trips, whether it's around the world or across the country and stuff like that. And it's sort of like something that a lot of motorcycle riders aspire to. As a filmmaker, do you look at something like a 90-minute documentary and go, oh, that's what I want to make one day. I want to make a really long film that really appeals to me. Is that something that gets you excited? No?
No, not at all. It's just like, I also don't aspire to do a very long trip. Simon, like when I was first getting into riding, I watched A Long Way Round like every other adventure rider on the planet, and got inspired that first winter of my first season to then fly down to Nicaragua and ride solo for 3 weeks. And that was back before people really wanted to do that type of thing. It was like, I don't know, 13, 14 years ago. And so everyone was like shocked that I would do such a thing, but it was fun. And I met a few guys who were on their long rides down to Argentina, and all I could see was they were in such a destination mode that they were not able to really enjoy it, because they had to push to get to the next border. They had time frames that they couldn't go and do. And they were also exhausted from riding. Like, it's not that much fun to like beat yourself to a pulp every single day for months on end. It's fun to do that for a short amount of time. But then, I would get off, like on that Nicaragua ride, I got off the bike and went horseback riding for a couple of days. And that was like, yeah, riding a different vehicle, basically. Lots of skills transfer over. But it was an amazing way to experience that area differently than on my bike. Or like I took a tube down a river one day and such, or I hiked a live volcano for New Year's Eve with a hiking group, and stayed and camped and looked into the depths of this volcano. It was amazing. But like, just to push for months on end, I really respect that people do it, but I have no interest in doing that. And the same with a long film. Like, a long film in my mind is just like, why is that better? Why is that better than a short film? Like, I don't see, as long as you're making great film, even like some shorts that are 1 to 2 minutes are just so brilliant, like, so yeah, I don't have an aspiration like that.
Interesting. Okay. I do want to ask a little bit about the TMFF in Victoria, but just before we do that, I think I did indicate that I needed you to tell me a little bit about some grizzly bear action in your part of the world. Because, I mean, I've done a lot of diving, and I've done a lot of diving with sharks, and people go, oh, well, that sounds exciting. But, to me, shark diving's not exciting at all, because I've done it so often. But if you said to me, oh, yeah, grizzly walked through the property yesterday or whatever, that would be exciting. So, I mean, often when you're out riding your bike, how often do you see a grizzly bear?
Well, Simon, you don't know my end of the world very well. Where I live, there aren't very many grizzly bears on northern Vancouver Island. We do have one just north of town right now that's been well documented. That's a mama with cubs, and that's along the beautiful Eve River. That was spotted this summer, which was pretty exciting for folks around town because grizzly bears are on northern BC, not on Vancouver Island. Although I think some of the folks up north on Port Hardy, Vancouver Island, would argue elsewhere a little bit about that. So it's quite debated. We have tons of black bears though, and I have a lot more experience with black bears in the backcountry. And, I went for a ride just north of town. Many folks on the side of the continent would know about the North Island 1000. That was a long part of the route there on the North Island 1000, which is a great route of off-road travel on northern Vancouver Island. And on one ride, I saw like 6 or 7, and I almost clobbered one. It's not always fun to see them, but they're big, dumb dogs, basically. And they don't want to eat meat, typically. They want to eat salmon and they want to eat berries and such. So I'm not really scared of the black bears. We used to have in Squamish, where I used to live before my head injury, we used to have one that would come into the backyard every night. Like, it was just like, oh, I'm going over to the Save On Foods to try to eat out of the dumpster, So yeah, the fear of bears, though, I will say, is a really funny thing to me, because a lot of the guys I ride with are terrified at night when they're solo in their tents because they're worried about bears. And I always laugh because I've never had problems with bears. And I do try to be bear aware by stashing my food and stuff like that. But I am horrible at hanging in a tree, to be honest. I usually just curl it up, run far, far away from my campsite and dump it in the bush in a sealed bag and hope for the best. And I've never had a bear eat it because there's so much in the wilderness for them to eat. That probably smells better than my crappy beef jerky, But I will say that I lie in bed at night and I'm scared of the dumb redneck who pulls up in the middle of the night and makes himself friendly. And I have had that scenario happen. And so I was really laughing when this whole TikTok trend came out about the bear versus man. Are you scared of those? And I was like, oh God, guys, I've had guys invite themselves to my campfire and be very clear about being interested. And I just keep my hatchet at hand because I've had a guy show up in my tent and when I'm sleeping even and walk around my tent. And I didn't know what to do because you're so vulnerable in a tent and you don't want to crawl out on your hands and knees because you're just a sitting duck. And so I honestly just mouthed off and sounded like the craziest woman you've ever heard. And figured that was my best bet. And the guy eventually just walked away. And I have no idea who it was, except earlier in the evening, I believe it was the guy who stopped on the road to pretend he was a police officer and pretend that I was on his property when I knew I was on Crown land. I lived in that area. But anyways, you open up a can of worms on that. Bears, not as scared of, except for grizzly bears. I certainly do not want to surprise them. And I don't want to be out there when they're hungry, which is usually very late fall, when they're trying to stuff in as much food before they hibernate. But if you're in September, for example, when we were planning our trip, we did have a grand debate about whether or not to bring a gun, just in case one of us came around a corner and surprised a grizzly. And, you're on a bike, you're moving quickly. That does seem like a deer, running away type of thing. And we talked about bringing a gun, but both Kate's former Canadian military and Kathy's former police officer, and both of them said, I'd prefer you not, because I was fairly new to gun ownership. So they were more worried that I might accidentally shoot myself or others. And so I was like, okay, we're going without, but we had bear bangers and such. But I did worry about us being more attractants because we're 4 women. And, there's 4 weeks in a month and there might be more reason to be an attractant. So I was worried about that a bit. And I just didn't want to be stupid if something were to happen and not be able to do anything, But yeah, we didn't have that problem on that trip. And there's certainly going to be other trips that are going to be in northern BC this summer in grizzly bear terrain. And I have camped in grizzly bear terrain, but I never see them. They don't want to be around us. Mainly, unless people have been obnoxious and been feeding them, which has been a problem at some of my favorite campsites in BC.
Yeah. Just to tie it back to my shark diving days, the parallels are so similar. I mean, this is the thing, when you tell people they're just not interested in eating you, most of the time, the people, of course, occasionally people do get bitten, get killed by these things.
Yeah.
Most of the time, the sharks have made a mistake. From everything that I've ever heard, and just the number of times I've ever, we've gone looking for sharks and like massive, big hammerhead sharks, and they see you and they're scared and they take off, and it's really disappointing. You can only get to 30 meters before they take off. So it's, there's a certain parallel there.
I will say, though, what I would be scared of in the wilderness is a cougar. I have had a friend who got attacked by a cougar when he was mountain biking. It literally jumped off a cliff onto him and knocked him off his bike. He was okay. His friends happened to ride up right after that, and he had his bike like trying to shake it at the cougar to scare it off, and the cougar was not scared. Cougars are treacherous animals, and I would not want to run into them. But then again, they are generally scared, and they do not want to be around humans. They get confused, though, occasionally, and pick humans. And I will say also the sea wolves are a factor. We have wolves along the coast, and I have a friend who is ocean kayaking and in his tent at night. And I don't know if he had an attractant in the tent or not, but the wolves basically attacked the tent to try to drag him out of the tent at night in his bivvy. And the pack of wolves, if they're hungry, that's definitely of concern. But I have seen wolves in the wild here, actually on my mom's property down South Island, and most of them just looked like larger sized dogs. But the one alpha, I would never, even though I was on a second floor balcony, I would never want to be on the ground with that big, huge wolf. But generally, they don't really want to be around you. They want other animals, right? Yeah. The odds are so slim.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me about the TMFF, the motorcycle festival that you're putting on in Victoria in March next year.
Sure. So back before I had my head injury, I ran the Squamish Motorcycle Festival, which I started and ran for 3 years, which was like a family-friendly festival. So running events is not a big deal to me. It certainly became too difficult to run when I had my head injury. So it's pretty exciting to be able to run another large event that's motorcycle related. It's kind of like my big comeback this year with the film and now the Toronto Motorcycle Film Festival, and then bringing the festival to Vancouver Island for the first time. I basically said, I know you have a Vancouver tour stop, but if my film's in the festival, I at least want it to come to the island. And so I decided to be the host and coordinate that in March 7th. In Victoria at the Vic Theatre. And one little bonus film, actually, that's not part of the Toronto Film Festival. A friend of mine's a filmmaker in Victoria that has a motorcycle-themed short that I wanted to include, so we're going to do that. And basically, I'm super excited to bring Vancouver Island's motorcycle community together. We'll have different types of riding featured, and so I love bringing different types of riders together and to really have something in the spring when it's still a little bit too rainy to really enjoy riding too much, for a lot of road riders in particular, and basically just get us all together to have a great night of film and have some prizes and connect with other motorcyclists.
So does that mean that you won't be showing exactly the same program that was shown, for example, in Toronto in October?
Because the Toronto Film Festival goes on for several days, the tour, when it's on tour, if you're going to run the festival for the same amount of days, you can show the same amount of films, but each tour spot shows a selection of their films. And each tour spot gets to choose which films to showcase. Oh. So we're picking from that, hopefully in the next few weeks, from their lineup. But then I also added in this little extra short for bonus. Right. And it's a good surprise for everyone too. I haven't told the TMFF about that, so hopefully they'll be okay with it.
Well, no one listens to this podcast, so I'm the secret. So.
Oh, no, it'll be okay. I'll send him an email right after this.
And beyond the showing of the films, are there any other activities associated with the Victoria event that you're planning?
We'll have an intermission so folks can schmooze and have beers and have a chat. I'll be doing the welcome and doing some draw prizes and such. But otherwise, the Vic Theatre is right across the street from the Sticky Wicket. So I was thinking that perhaps we should have a post party over there. But I haven't told the Sticky Wicket that yet. So I got to double check. If not there, we're right downtown. So there's lots of different spots we can grab a pint and celebrate the motorcycle industry and the festival. Yeah. Sure.
Okay. Finally, the last question that I do like to ask my guests. Does filmmaking enhance or diminish the pleasure of a motorcycle ride for you?
That's a hard question, Simon. I think it actually takes away from my riding because I like to be solo, and there's enough complications when you're adventure riding that you come across and enough to coordinate. And so I really felt like a Wilder Way was a dream trip that I didn't get to have, to be honest, because I was so stressed trying to coordinate all the things that by the time we got out there, I was exhausted. So how do you really enjoy a trip when you're exhausted and enjoy the challenge of a trip like that? And that's really sad for me to admit that to you, but that's part of the reason why you don't see all over my Instagram more and more footage, because I'm trying to just go out and ride and not focus on how others might perceive the images that I choose to take or ask where I went, because I don't like to share the secrets of the beauty places of the world so that everyone and their dog can go there. And I don't share GPS tracks because I don't take them. And so, yeah, I would say, unfortunately, filmmaking takes away from riding for me. So that's why I guess it means a lot to me that folks really take the time to watch the show and enjoy the show, because I gave up a huge part of my beautiful goal, and I don't yet have it committed to be able to go back there. It's so hard to coordinate that. It's so expensive to get out there. And I pulled all the favors I could to get to do that one trip. But I do dream of doing it. But it's hard because everyone will want me to film when I go back. And I don't want to film when I go back, because then it takes away my energy from actually enjoying the adventure. So we'll see if I decide to give to others or give to myself in the future for another Wilder Way.
Thanks so much for being my guest today. Where can listeners find out more about Jolly Good Multimedia and perhaps find examples of the productions you've worked on?
Sure. We have a YouTube channel, Jolly Good Multimedia, as well as we put out our trailer and other shorts on our Instagram and Facebook. Jolly Good Multimedia, that's easy to find.
Great. Okay. Look, thank you so much for being my guest today. Take care and ride safe.
I'll ride fast instead. I hate that phrase, to be honest. I'm a bit sassy for that. Thank you, though. I appreciate the gesture.
Okay. Take care and ride fast and safe.
Yeah, thanks. You take care, too. Thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.